Hello.
Welcome back to the Space School Look, otherwise known as PPSW, your favorite hangout place. Today we're back with another Star Wars story. Today we're going to find out what would have happened had Obi-Wan fallen in love with Shaak Ti. Before we begin this video, special thanks to our patrons, voice actors, and anyone else a part of the Pente team. If you want a chance to win in our next giveaway, watch to the end of the video and I will tell you all about how you can win a free lightsaber. And also, if you love Master Kenobi and Master Shaak Ti, then you're going to love today's sponsor, Surfshark VPN. Do you like going under the radar, securing your online presence, or being able to change your location with the ignition of your lightsaber? Then Surfshark VPN is just for you.
This is where the fun begins.
Surfshark is a virtual private network that covers up everything you do online. So whenever you connect to the internet, you are completely protected from anyone who tries to snoop on you, keeping everything you do online completely safe. It's like always having the high ground on scammers.
I have the high ground!
With Surfshark, you can do pretty much anything. You can connect to popular websites that might be blocked in your country while traveling by changing your virtual location. Say, for example, your favorite Netflix show isn't available in the United Kingdom, but is available in the United States. Just simply switch your location and watch away.
Oh, this is going to be easy.
It gets better than that, too. Surfshark will protect you from copious amounts of virtual threats. You can join any public Wi-Fi when you're out, and you can keep all your information safe. So you'll always have complete safety while accessing your bank account when out with friends, or even better, the best deals on those Jedi robes you've been shopping for. And if you don't like cookies, and no, I don't mean the delicious pastry, I mean the little bar that pops up on every single website you visit, Surfshark will get rid of them too. Get Surfshark VPN at this link right here and enter the promo code PentePatrol for an 83% discount off and 3 whole extra months for free. This is the best deal you can get anywhere in the galaxy. Thank you again, Surfshark, for sponsoring this video. Our story begins inside of the Jedi Temple, in the year 50 BBY. One of several youngling classes made its way through the Jedi Temple. The teacher of the group was Master Tera Sinube. He was the substitute of the day. The class had the largest variety in age. One of the older members of the group was 9. She was born in 59 BBY, and her name was Shaak Ti, while another one of her peers in this class of 30 or so students was one of the middle-aged students. He was about 7 years old, and he was born in 57 BBY. That would be Obi-Wan Kenobi. The two of them didn't interact much. For younglings, they were assigned a class, and they consistently stayed in that class as they leveled up, meaning they didn't interact with many of their other peers. Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti often sat at opposite sides of the classroom, and they continued to avoid each other without intentionally doing so. Neither of them had any real issue with one or the other. It was just a coincidence that they never really interacted with each other. For younglings, their main priority in the early days of their training was learning Galactic Common and other common systems in the galaxy. There were Galactic Common math, science, and historical lessons for all the younglings to learn. For the Jedi, their students were often taught history, politics, and the effect of the Jedi throughout history. Basic understanding of the Force was also taught. Younglings also had very little encounters with the Force, and when they did have those encounters, they were taught how to use it mindfully and with balance. And while all the knowledge of these younglings that was gained was impressive, it wasn't easy. For children, they had to learn a lot, and they were constantly under surveillance. Younglings had a very strict schedule. Some days they were taught studies in classrooms, and other days they were at random places within the temple, learning and practicing aerobics. The point of these exercises were to loosen their bodies up and become conditioned to the type of movement, so that once they became adults they'd be flexible enough and able to help those in need without worrying about physically hurting themselves in the process. The studies of the Jedi younglings were very strict, but they helped the young students of the Order become enlightened towards everything the galaxy had to offer. The lessons that the Jedi were taught were very exceptional, and some of the best in the galaxy, if not the best that anyone could receive in the galaxy. While it all seemed like a lot of work, Jedi younglings were often very pampered and well taken care of. Teachers of the Order had the sole goal of raising these students to become peacebringers, and because this was a time of peace, that's what they were taught. No Jedi had to grow into a warrior. This was an era of exclusive peace. The Jedi had the luxury of spending years inside of the great Jedi Temple on Coruscant. For every child, the Jedi Temple was magnificent. The towering pillars and the massive hallways, the Jedi Council members, and all the ancient art of the Jedi Temple. It was truly a wondrous landscape to live in, and while the temple was their home, it only got more magnificent the more time they spent within it. Tera Sinube started walking through the temple with his class behind him. This class was one of the better classes in the temple, and many of the council members had high hopes for this class to succeed. though not every member of this class was presumed to have a successful career within the Order. Every class was randomly put together, which is why this class had such a difference in age, and there were also a couple of students every so often that couldn't pass the trials to become a Padawan. One of those members within this class was Obi-Wan Kenobi. He had an exceptional midichlorian count, but as a boy he showed no evidence to support that count. He was weaker with the Force and he wasn't exactly keeping up with his peers on this topic exclusively. Everything else Kenobi did really well with. He casually passed exams and outsmarted most of his class, even those older than him, but he was struggling with the Force. For the teachers, they saw this time to time. It was common for there to be late bloomers within youngling classes. It was hard to get them to have their own boost of success, but sometimes they didn't respond to the boost. For Kenobi, this was also the case. There was genuine worry for the teachers because Kenobi couldn't get over this hump, and he could fail out of the Order and be barred from it if he couldn't. Even though he had a high midichlorian count, he couldn't prove that he could perform the necessary abilities of a basic Jedi, and at the moment, he wasn't able to meet the requirements they needed him to meet. While he was a youngling and he still had plenty of time, he needed to catch up and earn his medal before he could have a shot at becoming a Padawan. Most of the younglings within the class reached this requirement to become Padawans. They weren't hard to make, but if someone was a late bloomer, like Obi-Wan clearly was, then it would take time. While sometimes the Order would keep late bloomers, most of the time they'd be released from the Order. Obi-Wan spent a lot of time in his studies, though. He was a boy, and he was well versed in the knowledge, and that was the knowledge that he was required to know. Obi-Wan was pretty nerdy when it came to studies. He loved to read information and jump ahead chapters for assignments. Obi-Wan was really ahead of all of his classes, but with the Force he was struggling. Most of his peers knew it, and some of them even ridiculed him for it. While Obi-Wan was a great individual and had a great personality, it didn't stop others from picking on him. Though those who didn't necessarily stand up for him. Most of the students ignored those who were bullies, because most of the time the teacher would deal with it. But not every time did a teacher notice it. At the moment, the class was walking to the Jedi Archives for their session with Master Sunube, who was a council member at the time. Master Sunube was a substitute for the class, and at the moment he was still on the High Council, though he'd be leaving his part-time spot on the High Council within the coming years. Though for now, he was helping out wherever he could, which is why he was here. Tara took the class to the archives and sat them all around the several tables within the archives. Some of the students were grouped off into different areas. Most of the class was in one of the main hallway tables. The table adjacent was filled with another class, so Tara had to take the remaining 5 students around the back to another table, which was surrounded by bookshelves, and it was close to the restricted section. One of the students asked Master Sunube if he'd been inside of the restricted section. The old man smiled and nodded his head as he told them to finish their assignments, and once they did, they could ask their questions. The student nodded her head and sat back down. All the students pulled out their holobooks and got straight to work. One of the 5 didn't. Instead, he pulled out something else and started reading. One of the students near him asked what he was doing. Obi-Wan looked over and told them that he was finished. One of the other boys from across the table mocked Obi-Wan, telling him that he probably got all of his work wrong. Obi-Wan didn't bat an eye as he returned back to what he was doing. The student who originally asked what he was doing asked if they could copy his work. Obi-Wan looked up from his holobook and shrugged his shoulders as he slid his work across the table. The girl that was with them asked Obi-Wan why he gave them the work. Obi-Wan looked at her and told her that he didn't really care. It more or less got them to be quiet for the time being while he did something productive. She looked at him and grinned. Obi-Wan then leaned over and whispered, telling her that he specifically wrote in the wrong answers so that they would get all their work wrong. When they were done, he would reset the book to the previous save, so he got a good grade, and they didn't. The girl looked at Obi-Wan almost with her jaw to the ground. Obi-Wan smiled and told her that there were alternatives to fighting back. And it continuously worked, because Obi-Wan continuously got hundreds on all of his assignments, so the copiers just assumed that they were copying it wrong. Obi-Wan was rather happy he could just pull this off, though not out of spite, rather it was just because he wanted to read what he wanted to read without distractions. The girl asked Obi-Wan what he was reading. Obi-Wan passed her the book that he was reading and showed it to her, and it was the book of Bastila Shan. The girl asked how Obi-Wan got a hold of this book, considering it was an upper-level book for the older students to eventually skim through for about a week and then never look at again. Obi-Wan grinned and told her that he got it because he was usually in the archive. It was laying around in the return bin and he snatched it up so he could read it. The book of Bastila Shan was like a textbook to read, but overall, it was very overlooked. The girl asked why he was reading it. Obi-Wan shrugged his shoulders again. The girl looked at Obi-Wan with the "Are you serious?" eyes, and Obi-Wan immediately told her that it was because he wanted to get better at using the Force. The girl smiled after getting the answer that she wanted. She told him that maybe they could make an accord. Obi-Wan looked over at her as she told him that she would help him with the Force and he would help her with their studies. Obi-Wan smiled at this idea as he asked why she might want to do that. Shaak Ti said that firstly, it was the right thing to do, but secondly, it would be beneficial for the both of them. And on another note, because both of them were so quiet, maybe it would be a good idea to have friends as they progress through their training. Obi-Wan smiled as he told her that he would love to do that. Shaak Ti moved her seat over closer to Obi-Wan's as she asked if she could have some help. Obi-Wan turned off the Book of Bastila and told her that he would love to help. Shaak Ti asked Obi-Wan how he was able to always get his answers right. He told her that at night he usually read ahead. When the younglings were free, he decided to go and study, and fill his mind with information. Shaak Ti looked at him and asked why that was, as Obi-Wan told her that he thought it would be better to use his time wisely than unwisely. Obi-Wan liked the idea of being smart, and thought that being smart would help him in his later years, especially after he became a Padawan and maybe even a knight. He figured that before he became a Padawan, he might as well fill his mind with all the information he could. It would make him a great negotiator, a debater, and, well, everything else in between. Obi-Wan told Shaak Ti that to learn from the past could prevent a future failure. Shaak Ti grinned as she looked at Obi-Wan. It was a very smart thing of him to say. Obi-Wan then broke off from the eye contact and told Shaak Ti to look at the book, as he asked her what she thought the equation meant. It was some galactic common math problems, and Obi-Wan helped Shaak Ti through them. When the boy across from him finished copying all of his work, he threw Obi-Wan's tablet at him. Obi-Wan didn't see it coming as Shaak Ti reached over in front of Obi-Wan's face and caught the tablet. Obi-Wan's eyes jolted up as he looked over at Shaak Ti with surprise. Shaak Ti then stood up as she lightly put Obi-Wan's tablet down on the table. Shaak Ti was one of the older girls in the class, and she was 9 and the two boys on the other side were 8. Shaak Ti told them to apologize. The two boys were in just as much shock as Obi-Wan because they'd never heard her talk before. She was always so quiet. Obi-Wan looked over at Shaak Ti and put his hand on her arm to try and distract her and get her to take her seat and calm down. It wasn't worth fighting over. Obi-Wan wasn't offended by the gesture, and while the tablet would have hit him in the head, Shaak Ti wasn't having it. The two boys looked over at Shaak Ti as their surprise turned into grotesque anger. The girl at the end of the table told the three of them to calm down. It wasn't the Jedi way to behave this way, especially the two boys. Shaak Ti turned to the girl and explained that maybe these boys shouldn't be picking on one of their fellow Jedi, especially one younger than them. Obi-Wan stood up as he tried to get Shaak Ti to sit down and forget about it. Obi-Wan wasn't afraid of conflict, but as he tried to express to Shaak Ti that it wasn't worth the time. Again, alternatives to fighting. The two boys rounded the corner of the table to try and press their stance against Shaak Ti. In all fairness, these two were not known for being very Jedi-like. They were on one more warning away from being removed from the class and 2 warnings away from being removed from the Order. The two of them were walking a fine line. One of these boys walked up and stood up tall against Shaak Ti as she walked over to face them down. Obi-Wan leapt up around to get in between the two of them, but one of the boys felt inclined to throw a punch at Shaak Ti, which Obi-Wan got in front of her and took the hit for her. Obi-Wan stumbled back into Shaak Ti, who placed both of her hands on Obi-Wan's shoulders to stop him from tumbling into her. The girl at the other side of the table jumped and ran over. Shaak Ti demanded to know what their issue was. The boys laughed as they said that they weren't fond of citizens being a part of their class, and Obi-Wan was going to be nothing but a citizen, being that he'd never be able to pass his trials. Obi-Wan turned around as his face began to swell up. Obi-Wan told the two of them, as he restrained himself from picking the fight back up by telling the two of them that he would become a far greater Jedi than they could have ever hoped to become. Shaak Ti stood parallel with Obi-Wan as she took his side in this argument, and the boys tried to prepare to get this into a true fight as Master Tera Sinube spoke up, demanding to know what was happening here. Shaak Ti turned over and told him that the boys were acting up again. Obi-Wan kept his face away from Master Sinube, trying to avoid this being further prolonged. Master Sinube could tell as he walked up to Obi-Wan and gently placed his hand on Obi-Wan's jaw and turned it ever so slightly to see the swelling on the side of Obi-Wan's face where he was hit. Tera knew these boys had a reputation, and in his old age, he forgot to keep them in the common area. Tera didn't ask what they did, because he knew they did it. Instead, he told the boys to grab their tablets and follow him. Master Shinobi told Obi-Wan he was excused to go to the medical bay if he'd like. Obi-Wan nodded his head as Shinobi and the two boys left. Shaak Ti told Obi-Wan that she'd come with him if he went to the medical bay. Obi-Wan shook his head, smiling and telling her that he was perfectly fine. They could continue where they left off. Shaak Ti smiled at Obi-Wan and nodded her head as she sat down next to him, and the two of them continued going through the lesson. Obi-Wan pulled up his tablet and inverted all the answers back to the correct ones in the original save. He used this to help Shaak Ti get through everything, though there was something he was also able to do because they got done so quick. Obi-Wan was able to help her with the next lesson and get the two of them ahead of their classes. After this day, inside of the Jedi archives, Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti became inseparable. The two boys were removed from the class and put with private instructors to make them more Jedi-like. The rest of the class excelled without them. Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan got really close as friends. The two of them came up with a great plan to help the both of them during their studies and progress. 3 of the 7 days of a week would be spent on book studies, while the other 3 days would be focused on Force studies. The final day for the two of them would be what most of their peers did, which was enjoy being a youngling. Of course, they still had their normal classes on a daily basis, which of course they sat next to each other in now. But after class, they spent time with each other, a lot. Though on some occasions, some of their peers would pick on them. While it wasn't appropriate within the order, kids were still kids, as they mocked Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan for being a couple. As the kids seemed to suggest, there couldn't be such a thing as a platonic relationship, though it wasn't necessarily their fault. Most students in this age range spent time with their peers of the same gender. It was normal groupings for kids. Regardless of this joking around, it didn't really get to Obi-Wan nor Shaak Ti. The two of them had thick skin, and even more so, Shaak Ti began to progress in her studies and start scoring hundreds on all of her assignments thanks to Obi-Wan's help. Obi-Wan, on the other hand, was still struggling to use the Force adequately for someone his age. Shaak Ti was relentless though. She did everything she could to help him. And while Shaak Ti was one of the oldest in her class, her new achievements in her studies could mean she could be selected to become a Padawan learner very early on. It was very uncommon, but sometimes 13-year-olds would be selected to become Padawans. It was the youngest age for anyone to become a Padawan in the order. As for the average age, it was about 14 and 15, leaning more towards 15. It was very uncommon to become a Padawan any year after those ages. Regardless, Shaak Ti told Obi-Wan that she would like to spend 4 or 5 days a week trying to help him. Obi-Wan appreciated the gesture, but he felt it was unfair to her to demand more days than she got with her studies. Shaak Ti told Obi-Wan that it was fair if she was the one who offered to do it. Now there was obviously no disagreeing or arguing with that point of view, but still, Obi-Wan did want to be fair. Obi-Wan would accept this offer from Shaak Ti, and the two of them would spend a lot of time in the training rooms. One of their favorite locations was a circular area on the Jedi Temple that overlooked part of Coruscant. They spent a lot of time in that room. They did their aerobic practice there, and they also did their Force training there. Though Shaak Ti was finally starting to make room, she was helping Obi-Wan, and he was finally starting to catch up with the rest of the class. Obi-Wan felt confidence surge throughout him as he and Shaak Ti progressed to the top of their class respectively in both the Force and in their studies. This meant that at this point, Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan were essentially competing for the first pick to become a Padawan. Both Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan were advanced enough to pass their youngling trials to become Padawans, but they still weren't of age. Though for Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti, they didn't really want this to happen. The two of them were currently sitting in their favorite training room. They had finished everything that they were doing for the night, and they looked out over the Coruscant skyline. The two of them were talking about what would happen to them after they became Padawans. Obi-Wan responded with a comment of what would change. Shaak Ti shrugged her shoulders as she told Obi-Wan that they would no longer be able to see each other every day when their new masters picked them up. Obi-Wan looked down and over and then out to the skyline as he told her that they could talk over the communication devices that Padawans were assigned. It was rather against the code to do so because the devices weren't supposed to be used for anything other than what the master told them to use them for. Both Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti got incredibly tight over the past several months. The two of them leaned over the edge next to each other as they silently watched the sun creep away. A soft wind blew as Obi-Wan told Shaak Ti that he could never thank her enough for everything she did for him. Shaak Ti told Obi-Wan that it was the greatest pleasure of her life to be able to have someone like Obi-Wan in her life. The two of them stood close to each other with their shoulders touching and beneath them, hands being held. Silence filled the air for several moments. Both Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan had their minds filled with confusion. These feelings between the two of them weren't explainable. The two of them were Jedi. They didn't grow up with loving parents, nor was love in their dictionary. Sure, it was perfectly acceptable for anyone, even Jedi, to have these feelings. They were natural after all. But for both Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti, they didn't know how to express this emotional connection that existed between the two of them. It was unheard of in the realm of the Jedi Order, but both younglings would have to admit that these feelings between them were warm. This bond between Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan was nicer than friendship. It was more beautiful than the sunset, and it left chills like the evening Coruscant breeze. There was no words that could exactly pinpoint the feeling that they felt, because no one could tell them what to do when they felt it. The question still begged, could they handle the separation that would follow in near years? Shaak Ti was 10 and Obi-Wan was 8 at this point. It would only be a matter of years before they were to become Padawans. But still, the anxiety of that possible future was unnerving. And then from behind them, the door shot open. Their class instructor walked in and demanded to know what they were doing. Their teacher was an old brute, and he was a bit of an annoyance to be around. He was very curious to understand what these two were doing. Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan jumped as they turned around and immediately released their grips on each other's hands as they bowed to their master. The teacher again demanded to know what they were doing. He wasn't stupid. He saw the two of them standing next to each other, though he did not know and did not see that they were holding hands. But by the urgency of which they turned around, he was able to assume that they were up to no good. Obi-Wan spoke up as he told the teacher that they were just finished their training and then they decided to look out and watch Coruscant sunset before readying for sleep. The teacher stepped into the room and closed the door behind him with the Force as he instructed the two of them to separate and stand on the opposite sides of the room. He spoke up again, demanding that they tell the truth of what was really happening here. Shaak Ti then spoke up, telling the teacher that they'd been practicing with each other for the past year. The teacher again demanded to know why. Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan spoke at the same time as they told them that they had done this to help each other grow in their classes. The teacher looked at the two of them with frustration. He didn't believe it. Even though it was the truth, he refused to believe that they were telling him the truth. The teacher told the two of them that he didn't have time for their charades. Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan looked at each other from the other side of the room with confusion. The teacher snapped and tapped on his comlink. Another Jedi Master walked in, demanding that Shaak Ti come with her. Shaak Ti looked back and forth as she tried to figure out what was going on. The Jedi Master stormed in and pulled Shaak Ti out of the room as she tried to look back to Obi-Wan. The other Jedi Master pulled Obi-Wan out of the room into the opposite direction. Both Jedi Masters noticed the amount of time Kenobi and Ti were spending with one another and decided a trial separation would be able to assist them with becoming better Jedi. Obi-Wan begged to know why they were being pulled apart, as Shaak Ti did the same thing to the other teacher. They didn't know why they were being taken away from each other. The two Jedi Masters told both of these younglings that they would be removed from their classes and prepped by individual instructors for the next 3 years for Shaak Ti and the next 5 years for Obi-Wan. Because they had both advanced enough and were essentially ready to become Padawans, the instructors believed it was necessary to prepare them for such. But because the teachers believed that Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti were sharing a romantic relationship, they broke apart the platonic nature of their bond. While in the eyes of these teachers this would end the romantic feelings towards one another, it did the contrary. For Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti, they respectively began, in a way, to idolize the other. The separation they felt because of these instructors made their emotions for the other heightened, and while the days would get longer and longer and the weeks became months, the emotions for the other became stronger. Because originally Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan, while extremely close emotionally and even physically, like they were that day that they were separated, their entire relationship was platonic. They were kids. Of course it was platonic. There was no romance in the air for the two of them. Well, of course they liked each other, but they hadn't developed the emotional capacity to fully express those feelings. But when they were ripped away from each other, they began to romanticize the idea of the other individual, which, as both Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti got older, would begin to slowly manifest into a romantic attraction to the other. They were the bestest of friends when they were with each other, and while there was certainly a deeper emotional bond, the chances of them forming a romantic relationship were less likely to happen if it developed naturally. The unnatural separation created a longing for the other. Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti would do well in their studies, but they would be trained with their lightsabers away from each other, and from time to time they would see each other in the hallways of the Jedi Temple, and it would light up their day, week, and month. Sometimes Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti would go multiple months without seeing each other. These short moments passing by each other in the hallway would only heighten their feelings towards the other. Sure, there were certain darkness that surrounded everything that happened here. Two individuals who saw the beauty and love and compassion of true friendship were forced back into the eerie black and white hole that every Jedi submitted themselves to. But because Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan were able to break through that barrier, they craved the feeling even more. Shaak Ti would continue to excel on her own though. She was destined to become a very powerful Jedi, and there was no going around that. There were chances of her becoming a council member, and the council assumed that at this early age for her. She was incredibly impressive at a young age, and a lot of masters were really trying to become the one to teach her. Shaak Ti's best friend was just 2 years behind, and there were also masters that really wanted to teach him. Though because Shaak Ti was older, and getting closer and closer to the age of which she would become a Padawan, the Jedi Masters were increasingly more interested in training her than Obi-Wan, who still had years till he was ready. While it would certainly be a painful few years, they would pass as Shaak Ti turned 13 and became eligible to become a Jedi Padawan. She was selected by a no-name Jedi Master who would take her under his wing and begin to teach her the ways of the Jedi and the ways of Form 2 and Form 4 lightsaber combat. Shaak Ti wasn't really emotionally ready to be a student, because while it had been 3 years, she was still emotionally tied to Obi-Wan. She really cared for him, and while she didn't have the words to say that she loved him, maybe that was exactly how she felt. The separation sickness, though, was still too much for her to bear. But the chance to see Obi-Wan in the hallways gave her hope, and now that hope to see Obi-Wan was stripped away from her, the same way the Master Jedi took her away from Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan, on the other hand, was kept away from all this information. He assumed that Shaak Ti would be taken away from the temple when she became 13 and became a Padawan, but the Jedi Masters kept that information away from him. To anyone on the outside, this was blatantly obvious that the Jedi didn't have many cases of students becoming, call it, infatuated with one another. Their poor handling of this situation caused a greater longing for one another from Kenobi and Ti. But with Shaak Ti out of the temple, Obi-Wan would continue to try and search for her, every day like he had for the last 3 years, but without ever getting the chance, the lucky chance that is, of ever being able to see her, and share a smile and maybe mouth a few words to each other, like, "I miss you." Of course, they couldn't be vocal about it, but both Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan knew what the other was saying whenever they could mouth their words to one another. For the next 2 years, Obi-Wan would begin lightsaber training, and would never get the chance to see Shaak Ti. There were a few occasions where she was inside the temple, but her master was informed to keep her away from Kenobi at all costs. On top of that, to ensure that Shaak Ti was away from the temple up until Obi-Wan was of age to become a Jedi Padawan. The most likely teacher for Obi-Wan at this point was either Master Dooku or Master Qui-Gon Jinn. Both masters didn't normally stay inside the temple, so it would be very fair to assume that Obi-Wan wouldn't be at the temple too often once he became a Jedi Padawan as well. The 2 years for Obi-Wan would pass by, and he would be selected by Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn, a rather out-there Jedi Master, but one who would ask Obi-Wan questions about himself. Maybe Qui-Gon was the perfect teacher for Obi-Wan at this point, but how could he know until Qui-Gon started asking the important questions? Like why Qui-Gon asked Obi-Wan when they first met why Obi-Wan was to be separated from Shaak Ti at all times. Qui-Gon wasn't given any information as to why, so he was curious, assuming it was a rivalry or something rambunctious. Some of the other students didn't get along, and masters would be told to keep them away from each other on the off chance that they would get into feuds. But this was obviously not the case, because Qui-Gon would have been told that it was so. So when Qui-Gon asked Obi-Wan, he could tell how flustered Kenobi got. His face lit up more red than a Meliroon. It was unbelievable. Now in Qui-Gon's mind, that was the face of a guilty child. But he persisted as the two of them walked through the temple. Obi-Wan had 5 years to think about how to phrase his response into this exact answer, and his response did not disappoint, as Obi-Wan opened up with a thesis and then entered his very own essay and ripped apart the order, and through his conversation with Qui-Gon, expressed how he felt. To be honest, Qui-Gon was very impressed. It was obvious that Kenobi was a well-spoken youngling, and it was very obvious that Obi-Wan was very attached to Shaak Ti. Essentially, Obi-Wan expressed that one day during his daily training sessions with Shaak Ti, he was violently ripped away from her because the two of them had a platonic relationship and the instructors assumed it to be romantic. Qui-Gon nodded his head. Of course he understood. He fell in love with the Jedi himself. She was quite a fine woman, but Qui-Gon believed he should withhold himself from such interactions for the time being. It crushed him because the woman eventually died, by no fault of his own, but it did hurt. He truly did love her, and he realized that he had something to relate to with his new student. This was something he couldn't discuss openly inside the temple though, but he would certainly discuss this with Obi-Wan once they left the temple grounds. Qui-Gon had a mission to go out with Kenobi on, and it would be the first perfect place for Obi-Wan to begin his training on. Qui-Gon would also teach Obi-Wan Form 4, the same form that he used. They were going out into the Outer Rim to settle some trade dispute between a colony and another colony on a planet in an area of 2 planets in the same system. It was really too much to really care about. It would be a drag, but when Qui-Gon discussed with Obi-Wan what the mission would be about, Obi-Wan recited all the information he knew about the planets and the systems they would be visiting. Qui-Gon was very impressed. The first impression from Kenobi was that he was quite intelligent, and while his Force powers were still just growing, they would excel into something remarkable someday. Qui-Gon couldn't wait to see what became of Kenobi, but with how well-spoken the young Jedi was, there was not a doubt in Qui-Gon's mind that Obi-Wan would become a great negotiator someday. Regardless, once the two of them entered the Jedi shuttle, Qui-Gon told Obi-Wan that they were going to get to know each other, until they got to the planet that is, and they needed to be honest with each other. Obi-Wan leaned back in his seat and nodded, and asked what Qui-Gon wanted to know. Qui-Gon said he wanted to know if Obi-Wan felt more than what he said he felt for Shaak Ti. Obi-Wan leaned forward and said he wasn't sure how to phrase it. He told Qui-Gon he had tried to live by the code, but when they ripped Shaak Ti away from him, he felt like he lost a part of who he was. Qui-Gon listened and told Obi-Wan to continue speaking his mind as he turned around and pulled the ship up into the air and up into the atmosphere of Coruscant. Qui-Gon told Obi-Wan that talking with him would be safe, and he wanted Obi-Wan to know that he would do his best to try and understand, because he was genuinely curious as to why he was told what he was told about Obi-Wan, and what Obi-Wan explained earlier. Obi-Wan continued saying that when they were separated, he felt each and every time he saw her in the hallways inside the temple, and he felt closer to her when he saw her. He had hoped to see her, and he longed to see her daily. He dreamed about her often and wrote about her even more. Qui-Gon told Obi-Wan that he didn't have to show what he wrote, but he asked to hear about what Obi-Wan wrote. Obi-Wan wrestled his hand around his wrist as he told Qui-Gon that most of what he wrote was his memories and the several months that they spent together. Each day they had together was a moment for him to feel something unique. He didn't know what it was, but it felt nice. Qui-Gon smiled as he pulled the ship into hyperspace as he turned around and told his new apprentice that what he felt was simply love. Obi-Wan felt something that not many Jedi ever felt in their entire lives, and it was a unique experience that Qui-Gon believed would enhance the bond between master and apprentice. Qui-Gon empathized with Obi-Wan, but Obi-Wan was quick to ask about love, to understand what it meant. Qui-Gon laughed as he told Obi-Wan that love couldn't be described by one individual, nor would a definition suffice. The answers he needed to know about love is that they came from within him and the person he loved. Obi-Wan didn't understand. Qui-Gon continued saying that everyone's definition of love was different. Some expressed it by bugs in their stomachs or Rathtars jumping around in one's chest. Qui-Gon experienced with love was very similar to what Obi-Wan described, but Obi-Wan didn't quite understand. Qui-Gon told Obi-Wan that he too was in love, but he decided to follow the Jedi way. Sadly, the woman he did love died. Obi-Wan was noticeably panicked by this, as he didn't want Shaak Ti to die or anything like that. He cared about her a lot, and while it'd been 5 years since they talked or even closely interacted with one another, he still deeply cared about her. Though Qui-Gon did make sure to tell Obi-Wan that there was a difference between love and friendly love. Qui-Gon explained that it's what love was. Qui-Gon shook his head as he rubbed his beard. His teeth glimmered when he removed his hand from his beard. Qui-Gon told Obi-Wan that he promised he would try and get him and Shaak Ti time to see each other again. Obi-Wan practically jumped out of his skin, but when he tried to reserve himself as much as he could. Yes, he was excited, but he couldn't appear as such. Obi-Wan was too focused on his reaction that Qui-Gon picked up on it. It was very obvious. Qui-Gon told Obi-Wan that he could celebrate. It was okay to do so. Obi-Wan asked Qui-Gon why he would do such a thing. Qui-Gon told Obi-Wan that he believed the Jedi Code was rubbish, and it ruined the Jedi's ability to use the Force properly. Obi-Wan then begged the question, not forgetting about Shaak Ti, but genuinely out of curiosity. Qui-Gon began talking like his own master, Dooku, as he told Obi-Wan that the Order was severely flawed, and sadly, Obi-Wan had to experience that flaw early into his life. But that flaw may have given Obi-Wan the ability to truly enjoy something the Order couldn't give him. That being, if Shaak Ti felt similarly to what Obi-Wan described, the two of them could very easily enjoy life better than anyone else in the Order. Qui-Gon continued telling Obi-Wan that the Order had become too focused on the politics of the Republic, and that focus on the Galactic Republic's politics was harming the Order itself. If the Order used its code and then relinquished its use of the code by focusing on the politics, then were the Jedi even a formidable organization? Did they even use their own code because they were too focused on politics? For a 13-year-old Obi-Wan, this question was off the charts for him. He didn't really know how to feel about this question, but Obi-Wan saw perfect reason with it. While he was separated from Shaak Ti, Obi-Wan kept reading. It was one of the things that he could do to find peace in his own mind, and all that reading he did eventually led him back to thinking about the Order and its flaws. He kept himself silent because he didn't want anyone else to hold the same views towards the Order as a whole. But the Order was severely flawed, and it was very obvious to anyone who could see it. Qui-Gon asked Obi-Wan what his thoughts were on the matter, as Obi-Wan thought back and told Qui-Gon that he was right. The Order was flawed, and it caused him 5 years of severe heartache, a heartache he himself wasn't sure if Shaak Ti felt or not. Of course, their brief encounters in the hallway could show him that Shaak Ti did genuinely miss him, but it was all mouth as an expression. There was nothing to say that she wasn't saying it and then moving on with her life and forgetting all about him. Shaak Ti, of course, may feel the same feelings of doubt, but both her and Obi-Wan deep down believed that the other still cared for the other. It was just a matter of time until they could reveal their feelings to the other. Obi-Wan rocked in his seat as Qui-Gon asked Obi-Wan one more question. Obi-Wan looked at his master as he asked him what his thoughts were on the Force. Obi-Wan stumbled over his words, but his point was that he learned with Shaak Ti it was something that could be used to help others. It could be used for compassion or for justice, but as it binded everything together, it also held the balance of fates. Obi-Wan continued explaining that he believed that everything was by the will of the Force, believing that if Shaak Ti really cared about him, and that he really cared for her, then the separation would allow them to become stronger together in the future. Qui-Gon was genuinely impressed, and asked Obi-Wan why or where this level of higher thought came from. Obi-Wan sighed as he told his master that it all came from hundreds of hours he spent thinking about this predicament. He was destabilized by what happened. Obi-Wan had so much extra time on his hands, and he didn't want it to go to waste. He also didn't want the extra time either. So after the first few weeks of crying alone in his room after losing his closest and bestest friend in the entire Order, and only friend, he decided to make something with the time. Writing dissertations on the Force, coming up with theses, and more regarding different opinions on the Force and the Jedi itself. Obi-Wan told Qui-Gon that he had holobooks full of information in his room. Obi-Wan began writing on the walls and doing everything in his power to keep himself from leaving the Order. He was just a boy. No one could blame him for reacting as such. He spent 7 years in the Order without a friend, and then finally gained one. In less than a year, he lost her too. Obi-Wan had to do something to keep himself from falling apart every day. It was a hard process to take a hold of, but when the tears began to dry and the heart inside began to mend, Obi-Wan knew that he had to come up with the answers he was seeking all alone, without his teachers and without his best friend. Qui-Gon couldn't be more amazed than he was now. Obi-Wan was impressive. Qui-Gon believed that the Order made a tragic mistake if they somehow managed to force Kenobi out of it. But regardless, the conversation between Master and Apprentice lasted until they got to the system they were assigned. Their mission would last for a couple of weeks, but Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan used their negotiation skills to maintain the peace and assist the colonies to coming to a resolution. It took a lot, but it was achievable. As for Master and Apprentice, their bond tightened over this, though their bond would only expand once they returned to the Jedi Temple after weeks of negotiating the terms of a trade dispute. Qui-Gon told Obi-Wan to go inside of the Jedi Temple garden. Obi-Wan, because of the crazy negotiations, had forgotten about the discussion before his mission began, but he nodded his head and bowed to his master and left. Qui-Gon called upon another master within the temple and requested that he, Dooku, and him all go down into the depths of Coruscant. Qui-Gon was brilliant, and this was a setup. Obi-Wan walked through the temple corridors, thinking about why Qui-Gon would send him to the garden, and then his speed started to pick up. His first adventure outside the temple distracted his mind, but his heart never left. Obi-Wan started pacing faster and faster as he opened the door to the temple garden. Obi-Wan saw such a familiar face in front of him. He stepped out, looked to his left, and then to his right. The garden was clear. It normally was in the early evening. Obi-Wan saw Shaak Ti, and she turned and looked at him. Her teeth reflected back at him as Obi-Wan started walking towards her. Shaak Ti started walking before the two of them began to run at each other. Their arms opened up, and as fast as they were going, they softly fell into each other's arms. The hug between Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan felt warmer than Mustafar and calmer than the winds of Lothal. They held this hug for several moments, as they told each other how much they missed each other, and how much they thought about each other for the past several years. Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti brought each other back. looked into each other's eyes and locked them for a short moment, and then they kissed each other. They were both incredibly surprised by this move. Neither of them expected it. They didn't really look at each other after the kiss. They both went back to the hug. That was the safer option. They didn't really know what to do. They had no clue what just happened. If it happened or not, what just happened. There was really nothing to describe what just happened. They were incredibly confused, so they just returned to the hug because it was the only thing to do. Nothing else could describe what they just did. Of course, it was a bit awkward. She was 15, he was 13, but maybe after being kept away from each other for so long, it just naturally happened. Obi-Wan told her that he thought about her ever since he lost her. Shaak Ti told Obi-Wan that he'd been on her mind for every moment of the last 5 years. The two of them ended their hug and looked over at the tree, and then moved to sit in front of it. They sat close to each other, like they had when they lost each other, and in between them, they held each other's hands as they tried to get to the bottom of what happened over the last 5 years. They obviously missed each other a lot, but Obi-Wan asked Shaak Ti to begin. She told Obi-Wan that she struggled a lot. The first couple months after they were separated were especially difficult. She, like Obi-Wan, wasn't close to anyone except for him, so when she lost him, she lost the only person she became close to within the Order. Much like Obi-Wan, she cried a lot when she lost Obi-Wan, but she became stronger because of it. She told Obi-Wan that she tried to sneak out to see him, but when she found out that they moved his room, she lost a sense of hope. So Shaak Ti thought to herself, what would Obi do? And she did it. Shaak Ti began to focus her energy on productive efforts. She began to keep training herself and keep reading to herself. She progressed a lot and then got smarter. Though Shaak Ti had the issue of becoming a Padawan sooner than a Kenobi, and the issue is that her master was kind of a prick. He didn't really get to know her much, and he was just getting another student for his records for an attempt to get himself into the High Council. He wasn't exceptionally talented at all. He really only seemed to be in it for himself, with the only thought on his mind, gaining knowledge for himself and gaining a spot in the council for himself. Shaak Ti continued telling Obi-Wan that a lot of what she learned was based off of her resilience in her undesirable situation. She didn't want to be in this situation, but she was better for it. She became better, and because of her dedication to herself and her future, she became better, which sadly looked good on her master. But she couldn't do anything to prevent him from taking advantage of what she was accomplishing. Regardless, Shaak Ti told Obi-Wan that she did a lot of writing about everything. She wrote poetry, even song lyrics. Shaak Ti was very calmed by the experience of writing. A lot of these writings helped her cope with the loss of her best friend, because more than anything, as much as she cared about Obi-Wan, he was the best friend she ever had, and that was worth everything to her. Obi-Wan smiled at Shaak Ti as the two of them placed their foreheads together. It was a very simple touch that delicately conveyed the true meaning between infatuation, the forehead touch placed between two minds distanced by worlds apart, but never ever truly apart. Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan stayed like this for a moment as they broke apart to ensure no one came out to see it. Again, the garden was usually empty during this time of day. Regardless, Shaak Ti asked Obi-Wan about his experience. Obi-Wan explained everything that he dealt with and what he did to cope with the loss of Shaak Ti, which was extremely similar to what Shaak Ti did. He also told her about his experience with Master Qui-Gon and how he seemed to understand what Obi-Wan was talking about. Obi-Wan told Shaak Ti that they needed to save each other's transmission codes before they had to separate again. At the very least, they'd be able to talk to each other from a distance or leave messages for the other one to hear. They didn't have the opportunity to do this before, and now they had the opportunity. They could always stay close when they were apart. Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti exchanged their transmission codes as they continued talking. Something so beautiful happened though. Even though 5 years passed between their last interaction, they picked up right where they left off, as if not a minute had passed since they last spoke. They continued talking for hours, making jokes, telling stories, and making the best of the situation. How could they not? The last time they were separated, they missed 5 years of the other's life. This time that could not happen. This time they would be able to talk to each other over the communication devices, but they had to get everything out while they were still with each other here. The night over Coruscant got colder and colder. Most of the temple had moved to sleep, and both Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan's masters were in the underground of Coruscant, down near level 1313. There was no reason to worry about someone looking for them. The two of them kept talking as it got colder as they huddled up next to each other and continued their discussion. And as tired as they got, they couldn't stop talking with each other. They didn't want to be apart again. How could they? Why would they? It hurt so much to leave before. Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti then got up and started walking towards the door to get inside of the temple, where it was warmer. The two of them continued their walking and talking through the temple halls. They stayed quiet and kept avoiding anyone that might try and pull them apart, which in their mind could be anyone within the Order. So anytime they saw a creeping shadow from across the hall, they took a different route. After a couple hours, the two of them would get to Shaak Ti's room, and Obi-Wan asked if he could see her tomorrow, permitting that she wouldn't be taken off-world. Shaak Ti told Obi-Wan that he could stay in her room for the night, so that they didn't need to separate. Obi-Wan couldn't refuse the offer as the two of them walked into her room, and then they plopped down onto her little bed, and she reached over to grab her tablet. She showed Obi-Wan everything she wrote about him for the last 5 years. Okay, well, not literally everything, it was nearly thousands of documents, but she showed him some of the most recent ones. Obi-Wan read it and even teared up a little bit. Just like his writings from the recent weeks and months, they were all about memories of their past and the curiosity if things would ever be different when they saw each other again for the first time in years, still begging the question if they would ever have the fortune of seeing each other again, though they were able to. They put the tablet down and leaned up against each other with their backs against the wall as they continued talking with their hands interlocked. Though their talking faded into jibber-jabber as they moments apart fell asleep with their necks contorted to the side and their heads lined up against each other's. It wouldn't be the most comfortable sleep they ever had, but it would certainly be the warmest and the most heartfelt ones they'd ever had. It meant the most to both of them that they could have this opportunity to do this. In the morning, they'd both be awoken by Shaak Ti's daily alarm. Shaak Ti nearly jumped out of her skin, but then she remembered that her master was currently in the depths of Coruscant. Obi-Wan, also squinty-eyed, told her that Qui-Gon would inform them when they were coming back up. Shaak Ti sighed with relief as she turned back and leaned back up against Obi-Wan, and then they went back for a little early morning nap. For the next day and a half, Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti would be able to catch up on everything. They'd spend reading time together, and even training together, this time with lightsabers. For Obi and Ti, their lightsaber training was elegant. It was like a ballet of beauty as their blades danced like shadows under the evening moon. Their connection to one another made them move in unison like never before. Neither Obi-Wan or Shaak Ti ever had a sparring session as such. Then the two of them decided they would sneak out of the temple to get some food. It wasn't technically illegal for them to do so, but if it wasn't permitted by their masters, then they could technically get in trouble for it. But at this point, did they really even care? The answer was no, as they both left the Jedi Temple and got some food with each other at a local place called Dexter's Diner. The two of them were very obviously Jedi, but most citizens acknowledged that they were younger Jedi, probably sneaking out for an adventure, and they didn't really mind. Dexter, who was also the head cook of the establishment, came out to greet the two Jedi, and his overly kind demeanor made the two Jedi Padawans trust him like a friend. Dexter could certainly be trusted like a friend. He was genuinely a good individual, making an honest living. The two would enjoy their little outing before making their way back to the Jedi Temple. When they got back to the temple, they found out that their masters had gotten back and were looking for them. Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti placed their heads together as they wished each other a farewell. It would be difficult saying goodbye again, especially after their first departure. Though the two of them had the benefit of having each other's communication numbers, it would be the best way for the two of them to stay in contact. The two of them would split up from there. For the next 5 years, most of everything would be relatively similar. Both Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan would spend their time as Padawans, and they would continuously grow in their powers within the Force. Shaak Ti felt very disconnected from her master, but being able to talk to Obi-Wan over holo communication always helped. As for Obi-Wan, his distance from the code and transparency with his master allowed him and Qui-Gon to share a fuller bond. Qui-Gon didn't mind Obi-Wan talking to Shaak Ti, as long as he didn't wake him up in the middle of the night during their talking. Though as Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan got older, they progressively got to spend more time with each other. Obi-Wan did have an extended mission on Mandalore, but his heart already belonged to another, and nothing would happen between him and Satine, though they did build a foundational friendship. When the two of them were at the temple during the same time, they would spend time with one another. They would often do so without permission of their masters. Qui-Gon of course didn't mind, but Shaak Ti's master wasn't overly fond of it. Regardless, the two of them got to enjoy each other virtually and in person when they had time. Obi-Wan would send Shaak Ti little messages when they couldn't talk. These messages would be very short and very sweet, all of which motivating and helpful to Shaak Ti and her current predicament. At this point, Shaak Ti was 20 and Obi-Wan was 18. They were both young adults, and they were still Padawans. Shaak Ti was almost a knight, but her master was holding her back because he was trying to force her to stay as Padawan for another year, anticipating for her to have more growth under his training. As for Qui-Gon, he believed that Obi-Wan was ready to pass the Jedi trials. As Qui-Gon saw it, he assumed that Obi-Wan was a knight already, and he and Shaak Ti would begin going on missions together, and because of their tight bond, they'd be great representatives of the Jedi Order. Qui-Gon brought this news to the Jedi Council, and they nearly rejected it. But because Qui-Gon was so persistent, they decided to agree with it. Obi-Wan didn't expect Qui-Gon to be so forward with this, but when he found out, it was very appreciated. Though for Qui-Gon, he found out something through the request. The Council had their eyes on Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti because of their friendship and how tight it was. They were always around each other, and the communication devices continuously showed that they were talking to each other. While the messages and calls weren't shown to the Council, they did know that they were talking. Qui-Gon scolded the Council for their behavior, as he defended his apprentice's relationship for being platonic and not romantic, telling the Council that they should be ashamed of themselves for trying to prosecute an innocent friendship, because they bonded better than most individuals within the temple. They had each other, and only each other, as friends when they were first younglings, for them just to be ripped away from one another. The Council was confused as to why Jin knew so much about this, as Qui-Gon told them that he was transparent with his apprentice and his apprentice was transparent with him. The Council then questioned how Qui-Gon could call it platonic, and even make a reference to romanticization of the relationship. Qui-Gon spoke through the words that Obi-Wan had originally said before, begging the question of why else would they be ripped away from each other if the teachers or the Council thought that they would be anything less than platonic. The behavior was disgusting, and Qui-Gon told the Council that they should allow young individuals to be friends with whoever they wanted to be without assuming that they wanted anything more than friendship with the other. Because some younglings struggled to make friends, and Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan were those younglings, but they had each other, and then they lost each other. Qui-Gon followed up by telling the Council that they should be lucky that both students had good hearts, because if they didn't, it would be completely reasonable for them to be rude, or filled with the dark side. They had no reason to be nice, and they were. And yet, both Ti and Kenobi treated everyone they came in contact with great respect. Qui-Gon excused himself from the Council chambers after telling them that he would be conducting Kenobi's Padawan trials to see if he was ready to become a knight or not. When Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan met up, it was clear that Qui-Gon was fed up with the Council, but he told Obi-Wan that this was the opportunity to pass his trials. Obi-Wan was ready, and so, with Master Dooku, the three of them conducted Obi-Wan's knighthood trials. Before they were finished, Masters Sifo Dyas, Plo Koon, Yaddle, and Yoda made their way down to watch Obi-Wan pass his trials. All four of them were council members. Obi-Wan was told to kneel before Qui-Gon as Master Jin ignited his lightsaber and removed his apprentice's braid from his hair. Obi-Wan was now a Jedi Knight. He hadn't noticed, but inside the room, Shaak Ti was also present. She made herself hidden so that she couldn't distract Obi-Wan or be acknowledged by the other council members. When the few council members congratulated Obi-Wan and left, all that was behind was Dooku, Qui-Gon, and Shaak Ti. Dooku told Obi-Wan he'd love to see him on missions sometime, before congratulating him and leaving. Qui-Gon told Obi-Wan that he was very proud of him, and he wanted Obi-Wan to not follow contact with him. Obi-Wan smiled and told him that he wouldn't, as Qui-Gon followed Dooku out of the room, leaving Shaak Ti alone with Obi-Wan. Shaak Ti walked up and placed a gentle kiss on Kenobi's cheek as she congratulated him for his accomplishments. Obi-Wan smiled at her and took her hand and placed his Padawan braid into it. Shaak Ti looked up at him as he told her that this was a gift to her to keep her motivated. She would pass her trials soon, and then they could begin doing their own missions together. Shaak Ti asked Obi-Wan what he would do now. He smiled and told her that he would wait until she was free from being a Padawan so that they may begin their journey together. While the two of them had plenty of time to identify their relationship as Jedi, they had no role models that could possibly show them love. Without family, parents, or any signs of attachment around them, neither Obi-Wan or Shaak Ti knew how to identify their relationship at this point, especially at their age. Because they both loved each other, but they were still stuck under the cloud of darkness, just getting a piece of the glimmeringly light that came with love. The more they chased it, the more their eyes opened, and they were more open to the beauty that they were able to discover and enjoy without the Jedi Order. And while Obi-Wan decided to wait for Shaak Ti, she suggested that he go out into the galaxy instead. But Obi-Wan looked at her with a bit of sass in his smile to remind her that he would be right here, waiting for her, until she was a Jedi Knight so that she and he could freely be Jedi together. Shaak Ti smiled and she asked Obi-Wan how it felt to be a Jedi Knight. He told her that it was nice. He liked being a Jedi Knight. It felt freeing, and as if there was a better future on the horizon. Shaak Ti was very thankful for Obi-Wan's companionship, as they began to talk about the most recent mission she was on that she just came back from. For the next year and a half, Shaak Ti would be held under the jurisdiction of her master, and then she too would have the honor of becoming a Jedi Knight. Obi-Wan would be able to watch her become a Jedi Knight as well. For the last year and a half, Obi-Wan returned to the Jedi archives to continue his studies. He filled his mind with as much information as he could, and continued talking to Shaak Ti over their communication devices, and continued to write in their holobooks about her. When Shaak Ti joined him as a knight, they decided it was time for the two of them to take on their first mission off-world together. For Jedi, they could choose missions from a database, or they could be assigned specific missions by the Council. But because there were 10,000 Jedi, the chances of being selected by the Council were extremely low. As for finding a mission in the database, it varied on time to time when one was looking for a mission to take. But Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan found an easygoing mission in the Mid-Rim on a colorful planet. It was rather simple. There was a gang of pirates that were going around pillaging, so Shaak Ti and Kenobi would go out and deal with it. They would go out to the hangar bay and take a shuttle out of the hangar bay. The moment they left the hangar bay, they took the ship into hyperspace. When the ship was in hyperspace, the two of them got up and gave each other the biggest hug. For the first time in forever, they had some privacy, and all they needed was some privacy, was the warmth of a hug from the other, the one that they loved so dearly. So much time had passed since they were kids, and the love and gentility between the two of them was never changed. They always had each other, and each other was always the best other they had. They hugged for a moment, and then they sat down in the chairs in the front of the bridge as they leaned towards each other to hold hands as they picked up right where they left off, as they always did. They kept their eyes locked onto each other's, and they did nothing but talk about everything that they needed to catch up on. When they arrived at the planet after hours of discussion, the two Jedi walked side by side as they went to the locals to get a better understanding of what was really happening here. The mayor of the town said that there were pirates from off-world who came here to cause pain and take their belongings. The mayor expressed that they had no scheduled attacks, but they came from time to time. There is no knowledge on when these pirates would make camp or where they made camp at. The mayor told the two Jedi that they had 2 rooms arranged for them here. Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti followed the mayor as he set them up in a building at the edge of the town. It was already nighttime when they arrived, so it would be best if they just got some rest and spent some time the following day looking for these pirates. When the two of them got into the building, they went to their respective rooms. But not more than an hour later, the two of them were laying in the same bed, talking to each other just as they had when they were kids, falling asleep next to each other. For only an hour or two of good sleep, they would be awoken by the sounds of gunfire. It was the pirates, and they were here, so the two Jedi leaped into action. Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan left the building as they saw the pirate gang. About 20 members. All of them were trying to do obscene things. They started with robbery and then began to target individuals. So, the Jedi knew they had to do anything they could to stop this. When the two Jedi left the building, their lightsabers ignited and jumped into combat. Blaster fire could be heard over the screaming of innocents. Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti moved in side by side as they tried their best to defend the people of the town. Their lightsabers matched each other as they moved in synchronization as they blocked blaster shots. The pirates reacted with hostility because of the fact that both Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan looked as if they were younger Jedi. It was the truth, but when the first few pirates dropped, they realized that they were in for more than they bargained for. Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti naturally knew when to split apart as they cut down the vehicles the pirates used to get here. Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti tried their best not to hurt any of the pirates, but as Jedi, it was their job to do so. Though these pirates were not going to surrender, nor were they going to stop their behavior. So, Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti needed to do what they needed to be done, as they cut down every single one of the pirates before returning the peace back to the town. The mayor was incredibly thankful and told the two of them that they would never be able to thank them for what they did for them. Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti were extremely happy to help as they turned and left the planet. When the two of them got to the shuttle, they set it to jump to hyperspace, but not back to Coruscant. They weren't really paying attention and set the coordinates for anywhere random in the galaxy. The two of them moved into the resting quarters as they got down next to each other and started to drift to sleep. Shaak Ti thought of something she'd been thinking about for a while as she asked Obi-Wan what he thought about secretly getting engaged with one another. Obi-Wan's eyes were closed as they shot open. They were bloodshot, considering he was almost asleep until she asked that question. Obi-Wan's heart rate picked up, and then he asked her if she truly loved him. She, without hesitation, told him that she did. Obi-Wan then suggested that, why don't they just leave the Order then? Shaak Ti almost put her head through the bunk that was right above her, and then she looked at Obi-Wan. Kenobi almost jumped out of his skin, thinking that maybe he said the wrong thing. Shaak Ti smiled as she referred to Obi-Wan as Obi, saying that she would love to. Obi-Wan wrapped his arms around her back and hugged her tighter. The two of them talked about what it would mean for the two of them to leave the Order. Though, as they got into the conversation, they decided it would be better to talk about the positives of leaving the Order. There were a lot of positives that would come from leaving the Jedi Order. Most of these positives were the fact that they would never have to worry about the code forbidding them from doing what they wanted to do, or what they wanted to be. When they first admitted they wanted to leave the Order, it was like their worlds opened up, and they were given more warmth than they could have ever had before as Jedi. The two of them would have to find a place to establish a home at. Luckily, they had the credits from the Jedi Order, both in their robes and in the shuttle they were currently in. Because the Jedi didn't seek revenge, they wouldn't come hunting them down for the shuttle, or their lightsabers. Shaak Ti told Obi-Wan that a peaceful planet to call home, for the time being, would be Alderaan. While I guess it was a core world and its expenses would demand core world rates, there were plenty of countryside estates that they could live in, or build in. Because most of the people like to live in the cities or live lavish lifestyles, they would have plenty of room to live out in the countryside. The two of them would fall asleep on one another while discussing what their future would look like together. It was a beautiful vision of happiness for the two of them, and it did nothing but draw happiness to their hearts. Because the only thing they ever wanted was each other, and now they had each other, and the freedom to enjoy each other as much as they desired. They would eventually find themselves on Alderaan and their new journey would begin. For the first week or so, they would spend it at a capital city, where they could observe other couples going around. Most couples did most of what they did, which was hold hands, talk to each other, very innocent touching, and maybe kissing here or there. Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan were very obviously just trying to get the concept or understand what they didn't understand because it didn't exist within the ranks of the Jedi Order. The two of them would find a plot of land out in the wilderness and construct themselves a home. It wasn't illegal. Most people in Alderaan just wanted to live inside the cities. Those who didn't were free to build, but they just needed to make it clear that they were using the specific plot of land that they were going to live on. Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan's adoration of each other grew as the two of them began to construct themselves a home to live in. Both very young and very vibrant, but they also had a vessel to travel anywhere with. They had the ability to freely live, and they were able to begin to understand the bounds of their own relationship. After weeks and months passed by, it was clear to the Jedi Order that Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan abandoned the Order. The Council brought Jin to the Council chambers to understand why this happened. Qui-Gon was curious as to why they believed he had something to do with it, because he didn't. Instead, he questioned Jedi Council's motives in this and why the separation of the students happened. The Council demanded to know why Qui-Gon was being so belligerent towards them, and then Qui-Gon snapped as he explained it in details that would make sense to them, telling the Council that they took two best friends and separated them. This separation created a romanticization of the other. Obi and T sought after each other more and more because of it. Because the Council couldn't see past a perfectly platonic relationship, they created a romantic relationship built on a lustful image of the other individual, creating a romanticized vision of the other. It was the Council's fault. It was the teacher's fault too. Qui-Gon explained that he wasn't the perfect teacher, but Shaak Ti's mentor was awful. Allowing him to teach Shaak Ti was pushing her further from the Order than anyone else could. Everything the Council did because of Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti did to turn them away from the Order and never look back. Qui-Gon was genuinely proud of his student, and so was Dooku, because both Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan had the guts to do what others could not, to do what Jin couldn't, and to do what Dooku couldn't. Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan turned off their transmitting signals, and the last known location of either of them was in deep space. Both former Jedi kept their robes and traded in their clothing for natural clothing of normal individuals. It brought them more freedom, and then from there, with their new house, their love flourished. They danced together, they sang together, they sat and watched the rain together, they loved and cried together. Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti were able to experience the full spectrum of emotion that was stolen from them when they were forced to be Jedi as children. For Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti, this experience opened up their eyes to what they could achieve, and it was because they had each other that they could do it. Without each other, they couldn't have done this, but because they had each other, and they truly loved each other, they could. And before they knew it, their lives flashed before their eyes as months it took to establish a home with one another turned into years, and before they knew it, they had 2 daughters. But this was only after several years. Of course, they got to enjoy being with each other privately before having their own children. By this point, a lot had changed, and it was an angry galaxy as Dooku and Qui-Gon Jinn were sent on an expedition to Naboo to take a discussion to the Trade Federation because of its blockade over Naboo. This would lead to a whole chain of events that Obi-Wan would never have to worry about, nor would he think about. But it would lead to Qui-Gon finding a child prodigy on Tatooine with his master Dooku. When the two came back to Coruscant, the boy was given no chance to join the Order, and so then, Dooku and Qui-Gon returned to Naboo to kill the Sith apprentice they had encountered on Tatooine. For Dooku and Jin, Maul was not a challenge, and he was very easily killed. Though with the success at Naboo, the Jedi Council would forbade Anakin Skywalker from joining the Order, and instead Dooku and Jin would leave the Order, just like the brave young woman and man from several years before, and take a risk to lead the Order and train the boy. For Obi-Wan and Shaak Ti, their life was wonderfully built. 5 years together without the temple, without the code, and 5 years to grow not just as individuals but as a couple. They did it. They accomplished tranquility in life. They realized that the feelings that they felt for each other were just fleeting. On the surface, one may say. But emotions, yes, the ones that they discovered together, emotions are very deep, primal if you will, because they do linger. And as these feelings were incredible, the true balance for Ti and Obi was the emotional deep down inside between the two of them, that no matter what they faced, they'd always have each other's backs. And it was always true. They never found arguments, and they always leaned on a resolve and balance. Because no argument would be worth what they'd been through to be where they were now. Every discussion found itself a happy resolution, and their journeys were full of color and excitement. Interacting with neighbors in small towns from horizon to horizon, Ti and Obi found love in the moving universe around them because everything was wonderful. The galaxy was wide and beautiful and full of life, and now they had experienced more in 5 years than they could have ever experienced in 5 lifetimes as a Jedi. They often told stories to each other about their first encounter, and when they had their daughters, they told the same stories and carried them down into them as they told their children about what kind of life they led. Did Shaak Ti and Obi-Wan ever give up for their fight of freedom and justice? No, never. But they did find peace within themselves, and wherever there was trouble, they gave guidance. Because they weren't Jedi anymore, they couldn't swing their lightsabers around and use them on others in the name of justice. But it didn't stop Ti and Obi from practicing. They continued with the same type of schedule that they had when they were Jedi. 3 days on physical activities or training and 3 days on mental training. And on the final day, on a brand new adventure. Who couldn't live a life full of wonder and love? Or who couldn't love a life full of wonder and life? It could really go either way, but neither of them cared to twist the words around because the truth was it didn't matter, it was all the same. And while the galaxy would continue to change around them, it wasn't their first concern. Because when you have only one someone you ever needed, there wasn't ever more to worry about than the happiness of that person. A lot would happen in the coming years to decade. The Republic would struggle, but Anakin would be trained by Qui-Gon and Dooku, and he would bring balance to the Force by killing the Sith Lord. But while he had father figures he needed, he would never have the best friend he never knew he wanted. And while the bond between Obi-Wan and Anakin would never be formed, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan would have one final interaction before Qui-Gon died of old age. The galaxy would have its peace, but nothing like the peace that Obi and Ti were able to share with each other for the rest of their lives. Their daughters would grow up and learn about the Force because they too were Force sensitive, just like mom and dad. But Obi and Ti wouldn't put their children through the suffering they endured as Jedi. Instead, Ti and Obi developed their own understanding of the Force and passed it down to their children, so that they could understand what to do with these wonderful and wondrous abilities that they possessed. The children would be able to create their own lightsabers, and then, once they left the house, Ti and Obi would be able to continue to rejoice in love of life, or the life of love that they found with one another for the rest of their lives. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our beautiful story today. Again, special thanks to Benjamin Wells, Icy Raptor, Anakin003, and Gort for supporting the channel. Let's hit 2,000 likes on this video. We got our first animation coming out tomorrow. I'm so stoked for you guys to see. We got a couple animations planned for this month and next month, so stay tuned. You guys are going to love it. I'm super excited for this content to come out to you guys. This is because of you guys, you patrons, and this because of the videos, so thank you again to Surfshark. You're making these animations possible. It's all coming back to you guys. I love you guys so much, and this is what comes back to you guys. Thank you to Surfshark and to Raid for those sponsorships, and to the patrons, because you guys are helping make this happen. If you want to see what if, let me know right below. I read all the comments about Don't Do Crossovers. Check out the Twitch, community Discord, and Patreon if you want to support me in other ways. If you want to learn how to win a free lightsaber, go down below. There's a doc. You click on the doc, you go into the doc, you write your name on the doc, and you subscribe to the channel, because I'll be giving away 3 lightsabers when we hit 50,000 subscribers. We're almost 10,000 subscribers away. We're about 11,000, about 10,900 away. So let's keep going so we can give away those lightsabers. I've been wanting to give those lightsabers away for so freaking long. I want to give those lightsabers away. Come on, guys. Let's hit that subscribe button. Let's talk about our story today. Okay, if you guys couldn't tell, I'm really hyped about this story. This is probably my favorite story that I ever written, other than What If Anakin Was Never Discovered, which is honestly probably one of the most underrated stories on the channel. But this one is golden. This, I can't describe this any other way. I don't know where it came from. There are obvious inspirations in this story, and I will talk about those inspirations right now. But this story is really, truly something wonderful and beautiful and really gentle. Now, the inspirations for this are obviously, I would say, Romeo and Juliet without the tragedy of Romeo and Juliet and without it being a teenage love. Obviously, there's a young love altercation that kind of happens in this, but I don't want to focus on the young love. They're around the same age, and I'm cool with that, so I wanted to kind of let the relationship develop when they were younger until they were older, because I think the whole thing between Romeo and Juliet is kind of weird, because it's a bunch of people reading about 14-year-olds, and that's freaky to me. So I kind of wanted to avoid that, and while there were some moments where they were younger, I tried to avoid those as being crucial to the story, because I think the story really develops as they continue to grow and they mature into a relationship with one another, rather than being a childhood love, which obviously would have been acceptable back in the 1400s, 1500s, but that's not really our 2000s mentality. So I let the relationship develop more than it did in Romeo and Juliet, where it wasn't a tragedy, one, and two, they were adults, and they were both adults, which is something I really try to emphasize, is that they were both adults, okay? He wasn't 17 and she wasn't 19, he was 18 and she was 20, they were both adults, okay? I know for some of you in the UK, your thing is 16, but I want to go with 18 because that's what it is here in the US. And then the other inspiration for the story would be The Giver. That's one of my favorite books of all time. For those of you that have been on the channel for a long time, you guys know that I love The Giver. And there was a little bit of inspiration there. One of the quotes near the end of the story about living life and emotions, and how emotions linger more than feelings, that's a quote from the book, one of my favorite quotes from the book. It's really a beautiful book, but this was really inspired by those, and then the rest of the story just kind of went as it went. I'm not gonna lie, I really do love this story. This was something special. I mean, we've done romance stories in the past and they've been fun and yada yada yada, but this one is really truly at the core of what it means to, in my opinion, write a story about romance, right? A romantic story, because it builds for so long. Of course, with Jedi, it's always difficult because Jedi are Jedi, and that's the difficult thing. We know who Shaak Ti is, and we know who Obi-Wan is. Obviously, Shaak Ti had to come into Obi-Wan's life before he met Satine, okay? That's before he's a Padawan, or, you know, that has to happen before he's a Padawan. There's chances of that happening maybe after, but Obi-Wan felt how he felt for Satine for the rest of his life, and that's kind of how we've seen the canon, right? He meets Satine, he loves her, but he doesn't leave the order for her, even though he would. So this love had to happen before that. It had to happen somewhere before that. So that's what I had to shoot for, is making this love happen before that. And I shot for 7 and 9 because I thought that would be a good age range to start, where they could be in the same class without it being like, oh, why is an older person in a younger person's class? And I try to give enough reason for explaining why they were in the same class, because I think they very much so could have been in the same class because of the age range, and Padawan training is all the same kind of thing. But I thought it gave the opportunity. I wanted to give the build-up and make it feel really natural. The whole point of this story was really trying to go for a natural feeling vibe in it. I believe that the natural gentility of a relationship that builds like this is certainly possible and certainly something that can happen, but I wanted it to feel real. That's what I always shoot for, and especially with romance stories, because they are the hardest to do. In my opinion, I think romance stories are the hardest because you have to put two characters together that aren't normally together, right? And you have to kind of give them reasons to see each other in that way, and especially because, again, we all know who Shaak Ti is. She is Mama T. She is Mama Shaak Ti. There's no going around that. She is Mama to everyone. She is mother to all the clones, and there's no going around that. You cannot convince me otherwise. She is Mama Shaak Ti, and there's no other way to say it. And that persona in her is very much who she is, which is what we explored in the Anakin falling in love with her video. And that's her being like, no, I'm not doing this because I see things differently. You know, I'm older. Well, first of all, Anakin was like 12 years younger than her, which is kind of freaky, but exactly my point. I'm not going to do the ship with someone that's, well, actually, no, she'd be 17, 19 years older, I think. 17, 18, maybe 18 years older than him, which is really kind of freaky in my opinion. So obviously I wasn't going to do that, but for the story point and making it work story-wise was talking about how Shaak Ti isn't that type of person. Now, we've seen that Obi-Wan can be that type of person, but for Shaak Ti, again, we had to have that development happen earlier in her life rather than it happen later, because it most likely wouldn't happen later in her life, and if Obi-Wan met Satine, then it most likely wouldn't happen between the two of them, so the development needed to happen when they were younger. And having the two of them being quiet individuals makes perfect sense. Now, I've been ridiculed for this in the past, but Obi-Wan showed a lot of no potential when he was a child. He just didn't. He was really, like, almost put out of the order. He almost didn't pass his Padawan trials. I've been told that I have a bias against Obi-Wan. I don't. He's one of my favorite characters. characters, but there is no bias in my stories, and for Obi-Wan, I'm just telling what actually happened. He was just weak with the Force, okay? He had a high midichlorian count, but he just didn't show it. And that happens sometimes, you know? Not everyone shows it when they first, you know, show up on campus, you know? Sometimes it just takes a little while to show up. And that's kind of where I thought this would be a good bridging gap, because Shaak Ti was very, very talented with the Force. She was a council member, and there's a reason why she was a council member, and there's a reason why Obi-Wan's a council member. But if Obi-Wan's not an early bloomer, or as I say in this video, a late bloomer, then it would make perfect sense for Shaak Ti to be like, oh, well, if I exchange my Force abilities with your study abilities, then it would work out. And that's kind of what I wanted to build a foundation of the relationship on. As the relationship gets older, obviously, you can let all your mind happen. I don't normally do relationships where the couple has kids. This is probably the first ship, other than again Anakin being never discovered, where I've had the ship have kids. But I thought it felt natural for the story, the development, and the gentility and the natural build for these two characters really felt like they could actually have kids with each other. I personally could believe it, and I myself am my hardest critic, and if I can't believe it, then I don't think you will believe it. So if I believe it'll happen, and I can see it and I can vision it, I believe that you guys would have that same connotation with it. So if you believe that they could actually do this, and this would actually make perfect sense, then I'm glad I did it. But regardless, I hope you all enjoyed this video. Stay tuned for tomorrow. We got a massive, massive animation. I'm so excited. You guys don't understand how hyped I am right now. I'm literally like jumping out of my skin. Regardless though, I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.